Kyo-min stood in the center of the massive chamber and felt his hands shake slightly as he looked around at the strange walls that seemed to glow with their own light. The ship was unlike anything humans had ever built, and the air tasted different. Here, cleaner somehow, but with a metallic edge that made him think of lightning before a storm. He had been chosen for this moment because he was calm under pressure and had trained for years in diplomatic protocols. But right now, he felt like a child who had wandered into a place where he did not belong. The Velthani called this room the Chamber of First Understanding, and it was where every new species had to go through the mind touch ceremony before they could join the Galactic Council. Commander Haiwan had explained it to him 3 times during the journey, but Kyo-min still felt uncertain about what would actually happen when the alien touched his thoughts. The scientists back on Earth had said it would be like having someone look through a window into his mind for just a few seconds, and that most species found it pleasant, or at least not unpleasant. Dr. Sung-ho adjusted his scanning equipment near the wall and gave Kyo-min a reassuring nod. The xenopsychologist had spent months studying what little information they had about Velthani telepathy, and he seemed confident that human minds would work just like any other species when it came to the ceremony. He had told Kyo-min that consciousness was probably universal, and that thoughts were thoughts no matter what planet you came from. The door at the far end of the chamber opened with a sound like singing crystal, and 3 Velthani entered in a formation that reminded Kyo-min of dancers. They moved with perfect coordination, and their bodies seemed to shimmer between solid and translucent, as if they were made of living glass. The tallest one in the center had to be High Reader Kethvar, based on the briefings Kyo-min had received, and the alien's bioluminescent patterns were more complex than the others, with swirling designs that hurt to look at directly. Kethvar approached slowly, and its voice came from everywhere and nowhere when it spoke. The translator device rendered its words in perfect Korean, but somehow Kyo-min could sense that the original meaning was much richer and more layered than what he was hearing. Human Ambassador Kyo-min, we welcome you to this sacred ritual that has joined 347 species to our great council. Your thoughts will become known to us and our understanding will become complete. The other 2 Velthani took positions on either side of the chamber and began to emit a low harmonious sound that made the walls pulse with gentle rhythms. Kyo-min noticed that Commander Haiwan was watching from behind a transparent barrier, along with the rest of the human delegation, and he tried to draw strength from their presence. Ye-jin gave him a small wave from her position at the communications console, and her smile reminded him that billions of people back on Earth were counting on this moment going well. The process is simple, human Kyo-min, Kethvar continued as crystalline appendages extended from what might have been its arms. I will touch your mind for the duration of 7 heartbeats, and in that time, I will see the truth of your species. Do not resist or try to hide your thoughts, for deception is impossible, and resistance only causes discomfort. Allow your mind to remain as it naturally is. Kyo-min nodded and tried to relax his shoulders, which had become tense without him noticing. He had been through mental training exercises before, and this seemed similar, except instead of human instructors monitoring his brainwaves, there would be an ancient alien creature reading his actual thoughts. The idea should have terrified him, but instead he felt curious about what Kethvar would discover about humanity. I am ready, he said, and his voice sounded steadier than he had expected. Kethvar moved closer until it was standing directly in front of him, and Kyo-min could see that its skin was not really skin at all, but something that looked like living crystal shot through with veins of light. The High Reader's eyes were the strangest part, because they seemed to contain tiny galaxies, swirling in depths that went on forever. When those eyes focused on him, Kyo-min felt as if he was being measured by something far older and wiser than anything on Earth. Your species is young, Kethvar observed, and the lights in its body pulsed more rapidly. Yet you have achieved space, travel, and basic telepathic communication through your technology. This suggests rapid development of consciousness, which is unusual but not unprecedented. The crystalline appendages reached toward Kyo-min's temples, and he fought the urge to step backward. They felt cool against his skin and seemed to vibrate with a frequency that he could feel in his bones. Dr. Sung-ho's equipment began beeping more rapidly, but the scientist did not seem concerned, which helped Kyo-min stay calm. Beginning mind touch. In 3 of your heartbeats, Kethvar announced, and somehow Kyo-min could feel the alien's confidence like a warm presence at the edge of his awareness. The High Reader had done this hundreds of times with countless species, and had never encountered a mind it could not easily read and understand. Kyo-min closed his eyes and tried to think pleasant thoughts about Earth, but instead found his mind wandering to random memories from his childhood. He remembered the taste of his grandmother's soup, and the way sunlight looked through leaves in autumn, and the sound his father made when he laughed at old movies. He thought about the woman he had loved in university and how her hair smelled like flowers, and the way she had cried when he left for military training. The touch came softly at first, like a gentle pressure inside his head, and Kyo-min felt Kethvar's presence enter his mind with the confidence of someone walking through a familiar door. For a moment everything seemed normal, and he could sense the alien's satisfaction at finding what appeared to be a typical conscious mind, with the usual patterns of thought and memory. Then something changed. Instead of the calm, linear progression, the Kethvar expected the High Reader encountered something that no telepathic being had ever experienced before. Kyo-min's mind was not a single stream of consciousness, but a raging river with thousands of tributaries all flowing at once. His thoughts were not organized in neat categories, but swirled together like storm clouds with emotions and memories, and half-formed ideas all existing simultaneously. The alien tried to focus on one thought, but found that each thought was connected to dozens of others in ways that defied understanding. A memory of childhood triggered an emotional response which activated a problem-solving process, which brought up a creative idea, which reminded him of a song, which made him think about the mathematical relationship between music and physics, which led to a philosophical question about the nature of reality. Kethvar attempted to follow the logical progression, but discovered that human logic was not really logical at all. Kyo-min could hold 2 contradictory ideas in his mind at the same time and somehow find truth in both. He could feel happy and sad simultaneously, and his brain was constantly processing information on levels that the alien had not known were possible. The High Reader realized that what it had taken for simple consciousness was actually the most complex mental architecture it had ever encountered. Human thoughts moved in spirals and loops and impossible geometries that hurt to follow. Their emotions were not separate from their logic, but intertwined with it in ways that created new forms of understanding. Worse yet, every human thought seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. A simple memory of eating breakfast was simultaneously a sensory experience and an emotional connection, and a symbolic representation and a practical consideration for future meal planning. Nothing in the human mind existed as just one thing. Kethvar felt its own consciousness beginning to strain under the impossible complexity of what it was experiencing. The orderly patterns that had defined its existence for centuries began to fragment as it tried to process the beautiful chaos of human thought. Warning signals flashed through its body as neural pathways that had never been stressed before suddenly found themselves overwhelmed. The 7 heartbeats that should have been enough to read any mind stretched into an eternity of cascading mental chaos. The sound that came from Kethvar was unlike anything the humans had ever heard before, and it seemed to come from the walls themselves, rather than from the High Reader's body. It started as a low harmonic hum, but quickly rose to something that reminded Kyo-min of breaking glass mixed with the cry of a wounded animal. The bioluminescent patterns across the alien's crystalline skin began to flicker rapidly like a computer screen with a failing connection, and the organized swirls of light that had been so mesmerizing moments before dissolved into chaotic flashes. Kyo-min felt the alien's presence in his mind suddenly recoil as if Kethvar had touched something burning hot. The withdrawal was so abrupt that it left him dizzy, and he stumbled backward a few steps before catching his balance. For a moment he could still feel echoes of the High Reader's thoughts in his own mind, and what he sensed there was pure, overwhelming confusion, mixed with something that might have been terror. The 2 other Velthani, who had been maintaining the harmonic background sounds, immediately stopped their singing and rushed toward their leader. Kethvar's body was now convulsing in ways that looked painful, and the light patterns under its skin were pulsing so erratically that it hurt to look directly at the alien. The creature's legs, which had seemed so graceful before, could no longer support its weight, and it collapsed to the floor of the chamber with a sound like falling crystal chimes. "What did you do to the High Reader?" the alien on the left demanded, and its voice carried harmonics that the translator struggled to render. Commander Heywan rushed out from behind the protective barrier with Dr. Sung-ho close behind her, and both humans looked as shocked as Kyo-min felt. None of them had expected anything like this, and their carefully prepared protocols had no procedures for what to do if the telepathic ceremony went wrong. "We did not do anything," Heywan replied firmly, while keeping her hands visible and non-threatening. "Ambassador Kyo-min followed your instructions exactly and offered no resistance to the mind touch. He has been trained for this procedure and did nothing that should have caused harm." The second Velthani was now kneeling beside Kethvar and seemed to be trying to communicate with the High Reader through some form of direct contact. Its own bioluminescent patterns were flickering in rapid sequences that looked almost like a complex language, and occasionally it would make soft singing sounds that seemed intended to be soothing. But Kethvar remained unresponsive, with its body continuing to convulse and its light patterns completely chaotic. Dr. Sung-ho approached slowly with his scanning equipment active and directed it toward both Kyo-min and the collapsed alien. "I am reading massive neural activity in the High Reader's brain," he reported to Haiwan. "The patterns are unlike anything in our database, but they suggest some form of severe cognitive overload. Ambassador Kyo-min appears to be physically unharmed, but I am detecting unusual brainwave patterns in him as well." Kyo-min nodded, because he could feel that something had changed inside his head, even though he could not identify exactly what it was. There were flashes of images that did not belong to him, and occasionally he would catch himself understanding concepts that he was certain he had never learned. It was as if fragments of Kethvar's knowledge had somehow remained behind when the alien withdrew from his mind so abruptly. "I think I can still sense some of its thoughts," Kyo-min said quietly, and immediately regretted speaking because both Velthani turned toward him with expressions that seemed hostile. "Not clearly, but there are impressions of memories and emotions that are not mine." The Velthani who had been attending to Kethvar stood up and faced the humans with what could only be described as anger. "You have done something to corrupt the mind touch ceremony. The High Reader has performed this ritual over 3,000 times with no adverse effects. Your species must possess some form of mental weapon or defense mechanism that you concealed. From us, that is absolutely not true," Heywan responded with diplomatic firmness. "Humanity has no telepathic abilities and no knowledge of mental warfare. We came here in good faith to establish peaceful relations with your empire, and we would never deliberately harm your High Reader." Ye Jin had remained at her communications console during the emergency, and now she looked up with concern visible on her face. "Commander, I am receiving multiple transmissions from Velthani ships in the area. They are demanding to know what has happened to High Reader Kethvar, and several vessels are powering up their weapon systems." The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and Kyo-min realized that his simple participation in what should have been a routine ceremony might have triggered an interstellar incident. The Velthani clearly believed that humans had somehow attacked their leader, and their response was becoming increasingly military rather than diplomatic. He could see through the chamber's transparent walls that alien crew members were moving. With the urgent efficiency that suggested battle preparations, Dr. Sung-ho continued his scans, and his frown deepened as he studied the readouts. "The High Reader's neural activity is not decreasing," he reported. "In fact, it appears to be intensifying in several regions of its brain that correspond to memory processing and emotional regulation. This is not a simple case of telepathic feedback, but something much more complex." The Velthani, who seemed to be second in command, turned toward them, and its voice carried undertones that the translator rendered as barely controlled rage. "High Reader Kethvar is one of the most experienced telepaths in our entire civilization. Its mind has touched the consciousness of species from across the galaxy without ever experiencing anything like this. Your human must have done something to cause this damage." Kyo-min felt frustrated, because he knew that he had done exactly what Kethvar had instructed him to do. He had not resisted the mind touch and had not tried to hide his thoughts or attack the alien in any way. If anything, he had tried to think pleasant, peaceful thoughts that would create a positive impression of humanity. The fact that something had gone so terribly wrong made no sense to him. "Perhaps there is something about human brain structure that is incompatible with Velthani telepathy," Dr. Sung-ho suggested carefully. "We know very little about how your mind touch process actually works, and it is possible that our neural architecture causes unexpected interactions. The second Velthani made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had not been so bitter. Impossible. The mind touch ceremony works on the fundamental principles of consciousness itself, which are universal across all sapient species. We have successfully performed the ritual on beings with crystalline neural networks and quantum coherent thought matrices and even collective hive minds. No form of consciousness has ever proven incompatible with our methods. Meanwhile, Kethvar remained unconscious on the chamber floor, and the chaotic light patterns under its skin were beginning to fade, which Dr. Sung Ho indicated might be a sign that the alien's condition was stabilizing or possibly getting worse. The other Velthani was still trying to establish some form of contact with the High Reader, but nothing seemed to be working. Yijin looked up from her console again with even more concern. "Commander, we now have 12 Velthani warships surrounding our vessel, and they are demanding that we surrender Ambassador Kyomin for interrogation about what he did to their High Reader. They are also requesting permission to conduct their own telepathic examination of his mind to determine how he attacked Kethvar." Hei-Wan felt the weight of command settle heavily on her shoulders, because this was exactly the kind of situation that could destroy any hope of peaceful relations between humanity and the galactic community. If they refused to hand over Kyomin, the Velthani might interpret it as an admission of guilt and respond with military force. But if they agreed to let alien telepaths examine their ambassador's mind, they might be subjecting him to the same kind of damage that Kethvar had experienced. "We need to find another solution," she said firmly. "Perhaps we can work together to understand what happened during the ceremony. Our medical equipment might be able to provide information that could help treat High Reader Kethvar." The second in command looked skeptical, but before it could respond, Kethvar's body went completely still, and the remaining light patterns under its skin faded to almost nothing. The alien attending to the High Reader made an urgent sound and began what appeared to be some form of medical intervention, but it was clear that Kethvar's condition had become critical. Dr. Sung Ho worked alongside the Velthani medical team in what had become the strangest collaboration of his career, and every few minutes he had to remind himself that he was actually treating an alien mind rather than simply studying theoretical brain patterns in a laboratory. The High Reader had been moved to a specialized medical chamber that looked more like a crystal garden than any hospital room Sung Ho had ever seen, and the walls pulsed with soft light that seemed to respond to Kethvar's vital signs. The Velthani, physician whose name translated roughly to Healer Eithmore, had initially been reluctant to work with human medical technology, but desperation had overcome prejudice when their own methods failed to revive the High Reader. Sung Ho's neural scanners could detect activity patterns that Velthani instruments missed, and his different perspective on consciousness was proving valuable, even if it was frustrating for both sides. The neural pathways in Region 7 are still showing massive hyperactivity, Sung Ho reported as he adjusted his equipment. But the patterns are not random chaos like we initially thought. There appears to be some kind of structure to the activity, even though I cannot identify what it represents. Eithmore made a sound that indicated thoughtful consideration. "Hi. Reader Kethvar's mind is attempting to process information that it received during the mind touch ceremony. But the volume and complexity of that information appears to exceed our cognitive architecture's capacity to handle it safely." Boram had joined the medical team as a specialist in human brain function, and she was currently running comparative analyses between human and Velthani neural structures. Her work was revealing differences that nobody had expected when the diplomatic mission was planned, and some of her discoveries were challenging basic assumptions about how consciousness worked. "Commander Hei-Wan, you need to see these scan results," Boram called from her workstation. "The differences between human and Velthani brain activity are far more significant than we anticipated. When we look at a typical human thought process, it involves simultaneous activity across dozens of different neural regions working in parallel." She brought up a holographic display that showed Kyomin's brain activity during a simple memory recall test. The image looked like a three-dimensional lightning storm with electrical activity jumping between different areas in patterns that seemed chaotic, but somehow purposeful. This is what happens when Ambassador Kyomin remembers eating breakfast this morning. Watch how many different systems activate simultaneously. The display showed memory centers lighting up along with emotional processing regions and sensory reconstruction areas, and even creative interpretation zones. It was as if remembering breakfast was not just about recalling facts, but about re-experiencing the entire event through multiple forms of consciousness at the same time. Now look at equivalent brain activity from healer Iathmore during the same type of memory task. Boram continued, and switched to a second display. This time the neural activity was much more organized with clearly defined regions activating in sequence rather than simultaneously. Velthani consciousness appears to process information linearly with each cognitive function taking its turn. In an orderly progression, Dr. Sung-ho studied both displays and began to understand what might have happened during the mind touch ceremony. If High Reader Kethvar was expecting to encounter linear thought patterns like its own species, but instead experienced the parallel chaos of human consciousness, it would be like trying to follow 1,000 conversations at once. Iathmore was examining the human brain scans with what appeared to be fascination mixed with confusion. Your species thinks in ways that we did not know were possible. Each human thought appears to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, while our thoughts exist in carefully ordered sequences. Commander Haiwan felt a mixture of pride and concern, as she realized that humanity's mental architecture was apparently unique in the galaxy. Does this mean that the mind touch ceremony cannot work with humans, or that High Reader Kethvar will not recover from the experience? Both questions remain unanswered, Sung-ho admitted. But we are beginning to understand why the ceremony caused such severe cognitive overload. Human minds do not simply think about one thing at a time the way other species apparently do. When Ambassador Kyomin was remembering his grandmother's soup, he was simultaneously experiencing the sensory memories and the emotional connections, and the cultural context and the nutritional analysis and probably a dozen other aspects of that single memory. Boram nodded enthusiastically because her research was revealing patterns that excited her scientific curiosity, even in the middle of a diplomatic crisis. Human consciousness appears to be fundamentally multi-threaded in a way that we have always taken for granted, but which is apparently unique among galactic species. We do not think linearly, but in complex webs of interconnected concepts and emotions, and memories. The implications of this discovery were staggering, and Haiwan realized that it might explain some things about human development that had puzzled xenobiologists. Is this why humanity has advanced so rapidly in technology and creative fields compared to other species at similar evolutionary stages? It could be, Sung-ho replied thoughtfully. If other species think in linear patterns, they might be limited to logical step-by-step problem-solving. But humans can make intuitive leaps and synthesize apparently unrelated concepts and approach problems from multiple angles simultaneously. Iathmore was still studying the human brain scans with intense concentration. This cognitive architecture explains much about your species that seemed contradictory in our initial observations. You appear to be capable of holding opposing ideas in your minds at the same time, and somehow finding truth in both. We call that cognitive flexibility, Boram explained. Humans can maintain multiple working hypotheses and adapt their thinking as new information becomes available rather than committing to a single logical pathway. At that moment, Kethvar's bioluminescent pattern suddenly changed from chaotic flickering to a more stable rhythm, and Iathmore rushed to the High Reader's side. The alien's eyes opened slowly and seemed to have difficulty focusing, but at least it was conscious again after hours of unresponsive catatonia. High Reader, can you understand my communication? Iathmore asked using harmonics that were clearly designed to be soothing and non-threatening. Kethvar's response came as fragmented light patterns rather than coherent speech, and it took several minutes before the High Reader could form words. The storm, it whispered, and its voice carried overtones of wonder mixed with exhaustion. I have seen the storm that lives inside their thoughts. Dr. Sung-ho approached carefully with his scanning equipment still active. High Reader Kethvar, can you describe what you experienced during the mind touch ceremony with Ambassador Kyomin? The alien's eyes seemed to see things that were not present in the medical chamber, and when it spoke, its words came slowly as if each one required tremendous effort. Human thoughts do not follow the paths that consciousness should follow. They spiral and dance and exist in forms that have no names. I touched one memory and found 1,000 others connected to it in impossible ways. What do you mean by impossible ways? Haywan asked gently. Kethavar's light patterns pulsed weakly as it struggled to find concepts that could be translated. The human was remembering food, but the memory contained music and mathematics and the faces of loved ones and philosophical questions about existence itself, all existing simultaneously in the same thought space. Boram exchanged glances with Dr. Sung Ho because this description confirmed their analysis of human neural architecture. Hi, reader, does this mean that human consciousness is fundamentally different from other galactic species? Different, Kethavar repeated, and something that might have been a laugh rippled through its bioluminescent patterns. Human consciousness is not simply different, it is transcendent. Your minds operate on levels of complexity that we believed were impossible. The revelation sent implications cascading through everyone present, because it meant that humanity was not just another species joining the galactic community, but represented something entirely unprecedented in known civilization. Kethavar's recovery progressed slowly over the following days, and as the High Reader regained strength, its descriptions of the human mind-touch experience became more detailed and more disturbing to the other Velthani. During one conversation with Yethmor that the humans were allowed to observe, Kethavar attempted to explain concepts that had no equivalent in any known language. When I touched the human's memory of childhood, I did not simply see what happened, the High Reader said while its bioluminescent patterns pulsed with colors that seemed to represent complex emotions. I experienced the memory as if it was alive and growing and changing even while being remembered. The past was not fixed but dynamic, and every moment of recollection added new layers of meaning. Yethmor looked confused because this description challenged fundamental Velthani understanding of how memory worked. Memories are recordings of past events. They cannot change or grow because what happened has already been determined. That is true for our species, Kethavar agreed. But human memories are not recordings. They are living things that interact with present thoughts and future possibilities. When the human remembered his grandmother's soup, the memory contained not just the sensory experience but emotional connections to family bonds and cultural traditions, and even speculations about how the recipe might be improved. Dr. Sung Ho found these descriptions fascinating from a neurological perspective, because they confirmed theories about human memory that had been difficult to prove experimentally. Hi, Reader, are you saying that human memories are actively reconstructed each time they are accessed, rather than simply being replayed? More than reconstructed, Kethavar replied, and struggled to find words that could convey alien concepts through translation matrices. Human memories exist in relationship to all other memories and thoughts and emotions simultaneously. Remembering one thing triggers cascading associations that create new connections and possibilities. Kyo-min had been experiencing strange effects since the mind-touch incident, and he was beginning to understand some of what the High Reader was describing. Fragments of Velthani memories occasionally surfaced in his consciousness, and when they did, he could sense the profound difference between alien and human thought patterns. I sometimes remember things that happened to Kethavar, he explained to the medical team. But when I remember them, they feel different than they should. The alien memories become more complex and emotional when they pass through my human consciousness. Boram was documenting all of these effects because they represented unprecedented data about consciousness transfer between species. Ambassador, what you are describing suggests that human cognitive architecture is not just different from other species, but may actually be more advanced in terms of information processing complexity. The implications of this possibility were revolutionary, and Commander Haywan realized that humanity's first contact with galactic civilization was revealing truths that could change everything. If human consciousness represented a more evolved form of intelligence, then the entire power structure of the Galactic Council might need to be reconsidered. Taeho had been working on engineering applications of the consciousness research, and his discoveries were equally surprising. Commander, I have been analyzing the problem-solving approaches used by different species, and the data suggests that human cognitive flexibility gives us significant advantages in technical innovation. He brought up comparative studies showing how various galactic species approached complex engineering challenges. Most species follow logical step-by-step methodologies that produce reliable but incremental improvements. Humans make intuitive leaps that allow breakthrough innovations but also create more failures. Can you give us a specific example? Heywan requested. The hyperdrive technology that brought us here? Tejo replied. Velthani scientists worked for centuries to gradually improve their space travel capabilities through careful logical progression. Human scientists developed breakthrough propulsion in decades by combining concepts from quantum physics and artistic inspiration, and even philosophical speculation about the nature of space-time. Yethmore was listening to this conversation with growing amazement. You are describing cognitive processes that our scientists believed were impossible. Inspiration and speculation cannot produce reliable technological results. For most species, perhaps not, Dr. Sung Ho agreed. But human minds appear to be capable of synthesizing information in ways that transcend pure logic. We can identify patterns and connections that linear thinking would never discover. Minji had joined the research team as a specialist in comparative psychology, and her work was revealing broader implications of human cognitive uniqueness. I have been studying creativity and problem-solving across different species, and the data shows that humans consistently find solutions that other species miss entirely. She displayed research showing how various galactic civilizations had struggled with specific technological and social challenges for millennia without making progress. These are problems that human scientists and philosophers have already solved through approaches that other species apparently cannot conceptualize. The revelation that humanity possessed cognitive capabilities that exceeded those of ancient galactic civilizations was both exciting and dangerous. Kyomin realized that some species might view humans as a threat, rather than as potential allies if they understood the implications of human mental architecture. What happens now? He asked Commander Heywan. Do we tell the Galactic Council that human consciousness is apparently more advanced than theirs, or do we try to hide our capabilities? Before Heywan could respond, Kethvar spoke up from its medical bed. The truth cannot be hidden because it has already been seen. When I touched your mind, Ambassador Kyomin, I experienced not just your individual consciousness, but glimpses of what your entire species might become. The High Reader's bioluminescent. Patterns shifted to colors that seemed to represent awe, mixed with something that might have been fear. Human consciousness is not simply more complex than ours, it is evolving in directions that we cannot predict or understand. Your species may represent the next stage of cognitive development in the galaxy. Yethmore looked disturbed by this possibility. If humans possess superior consciousness, then our entire civilization may be obsolete. The Velthani have guided galactic development for millennia, based on our telepathic abilities and our understanding of consciousness itself. Not obsolete, Kethvar corrected gently, but perhaps ready to learn new things. Human consciousness could teach us possibilities that we never imagined. Dr. Sung Ho realized that they were witnessing a pivotal moment in galactic history. High Reader, are you suggesting that the Velthani would be willing to study human consciousness rather than feeling threatened by it? I am suggesting that we have no choice, Kethvar replied. Human cognitive architecture represents something unprecedented in our experience, and we must understand it if we want to continue evolving ourselves. The conversation was interrupted by urgent communications from Ye Jin at her console. Commander, I am receiving priority transmissions from multiple Galactic Council species. Word about the Mind Touch incident has spread, and several civilizations are requesting immediate meetings to discuss the implications of human consciousness. Heywan felt the weight of representing her entire species in negotiations that could determine humanity's place in galactic civilization. What kind of meetings are they requesting? Some appear to be scientific inquiries about human cognitive capabilities, Yejin reported. but others seem more concerned about potential security implications of a species that cannot be read telepathically. The reality was that humanity had stumbled into a situation where their greatest strength might also be perceived as their greatest threat. 3 months after the Mind Touch incident, the Chamber of First Understanding had been transformed into something entirely new, and Kyo-min stood once again in its center, but this time, he was not alone. Representatives from 12 different galactic species surrounded him in a configuration that would have been impossible under the old protocols because it was designed for communication rather than telepathic examination. The Velthani had spent weeks developing new procedures for interacting with human consciousness safely, and HFY had volunteered to attempt another mind touch despite the trauma of the first experience. The High Reader claimed that understanding human thought was worth any risk, and had convinced the Galactic Council that humanity represented an unprecedented opportunity for cognitive advancement. Ambassador Kyo-min, the procedures have been modified significantly since our first attempt, HFY explained as bioluminescent patterns under its crystalline skin pulsed with calm, steady rhythms. Instead of attempting to read your mind completely, I will touch only the surface layers of consciousness and allow myself to experience human thought gradually. Dr. Sung-ho monitored both beings with equipment that had been upgraded using combined human and Velthani technology. The collaboration between species had produced innovations that neither could have achieved alone, and the medical scanners could now track consciousness interactions in real time with unprecedented precision. High Reader, your neural activity appears stable and Ambassador Kyo-min is ready when you are. Sung-ho reported to the assembled observers. Commander Haiwan watched from a position where she could intervene if necessary, but the atmosphere was completely different from the first ceremony. Instead of formal diplomatic protocol, this felt more like a scientific experiment being conducted by colleagues who trusted each other. The crystalline appendages extended toward Kyo-min's temples again, but this time, HFY approached with careful preparation rather than confident assumption. The alien had spent months studying human brain patterns and understanding the chaotic beauty of human consciousness, and was now ready to experience it again with proper safeguards. When contact was established, Kyo-min felt the familiar sensation of alien presence in his mind, but it was gentler and more respectful than before. Instead of trying to impose Velthani order on human chaos, HFY simply observed and marveled at the complexity of what it encountered. Incredible, the High Reader whispered, as its bioluminescent patterns began to pulse with new colors that had never been seen before. Human consciousness is like music that plays in dimensions that we did not know existed. The other species representatives watched in fascination as HFY described what it was experiencing in real time. The Crystari ambassador leaned forward with interest because its species had always believed that consciousness was limited by physical neural architecture, but humans seem to transcend those limitations. The human is thinking about this ceremony, but simultaneously considering the implications for galactic civilization and remembering conversations with family members and analyzing the philosophical meaning of consciousness itself, HFY reported with wonder in its translated voice. All of these thoughts exist together without conflict or confusion. Boram was recording everything because this represented the first successful telepathic contact between species with fundamentally different cognitive architectures. High Reader, can you sense how these parallel thought processes interact with each other? They do not simply interact, they dance together, HFY replied, as its light patterns became more complex and beautiful. Human thoughts create harmonies and resonances that generate new ideas spontaneously. This is how your species achieves breakthrough innovations. The Zephyrian representative made sounds of amazement because its civilization had spent millennia trying to enhance their problem-solving capabilities without success. Are you saying that humans naturally possess cognitive abilities that other species have been trying to develop artificially? More than that, HFY answered, while maintaining its gentle connection to Kyo-min's consciousness. Humans appear to represent what consciousness becomes when it evolves beyond linear limitations. Your minds are not just different, they are transcendent. Kyo-min could feel the High Reader's awe and fascination as it explored the edges of human thought, and he realized that this experience was changing both of them in fundamental ways. Fragments of alien understanding were integrating with his human consciousness and creating new forms of awareness that neither species had possessed before. "I can sense your thoughts as well, High Reader," Kyomin said softly. "Your mind is beautiful in its clarity and precision, but I think our consciousness types could complement each other." This observation proved prophetic because over the following weeks, Kyomin began to demonstrate cognitive abilities that surpassed normal human limits. He could access Velthani logical precision when needed, while maintaining human creative chaos, and the combination produced insights that amazed scientists from both species. Dr. Sung Ho documented these changes with excitement because they suggested that consciousness could evolve through interspecies contact. Ambassador Kyomin appears to be developing a hybrid form of awareness that combines the best aspects of human and Velthani cognitive architecture. The implications rippled throughout galactic civilization as other species requested opportunities to study human consciousness and explore possibilities for cognitive enhancement. The Galactic Council established new research protocols, and humanity found itself in the unexpected position of teachers rather than students. Commander Hai Wan presided over negotiations that established humanity as cognitive consultants to civilizations that had been stagnant for millennia. Human scientists and philosophers were soon working with alien researchers on problems that had seemed unsolvable using traditional linear thinking approaches. Yejin coordinated communications between Earth and dozens of galactic civilizations that wanted to learn human problem-solving techniques. The demand for human expertise grew so rapidly that new colonies had to be established just to provide enough teachers and researchers. "Commander, we are receiving requests from over 40 species for human assistance with technological and social challenges that they have not been able to solve using conventional methods," she reported. During one of their regular briefings, Taeho had become the head of a new department focused on human-alien cognitive collaboration, and his teams were producing innovations at an unprecedented rate. "We are discovering that human intuitive thinking can solve problems in days that have stumped other species for centuries." The transformation was not limited to practical applications because human creativity was also revolutionizing galactic arts and philosophy. Minji found herself working with alien artists and thinkers who were amazed by human ability to synthesize emotion and logic into new forms of beauty and meaning. Human consciousness appears to be catalyzing a renaissance throughout galactic civilization, she observed during a cultural exchange conference. Species that had not produced new art or philosophy in millennia are suddenly creating breakthrough works inspired by human cognitive approaches. But perhaps the most significant change was in how humanity viewed itself. The discovery that their chaotic, multi-threaded consciousness represented an advanced form of intelligence gave humans new confidence in their place. Among the stars, Kyomin stood once again in the Chamber of First Understanding. But now it served as a meeting place where beings from across the galaxy came to experience the strange beauty of human thought. Kethvar had become his partner in consciousness exploration, and together they were mapping cognitive territories that had never been explored. "When I first touched your mind, I thought I was encountering chaos," the High Reader reflected during one of their sessions. "Now I understand that what I called chaos is actually the most sophisticated form of order that consciousness can achieve." The galaxy had discovered that humanity's greatest gift was not their technology or their courage, but their minds themselves, and the beautiful complexity of human thought was lighting up civilizations that had been dark for millennia. In trying to seem normal and acceptable to alien civilizations, humanity had discovered that their true strength lay in being utterly and magnificently abnormal.